Hi Year 7s. In this video I'm going to talk you through writing your evaluation after a cooking practical. There are two sections to this. The first section is where you assign yourself and your partner a grade for the different sections of the cooking practical down along here. On the second page is where you delve into more information and explain your cooking practical and evaluate on the outcomes. Let's start with the top section. Up here is where you're going to give yourself a grade, either an A, a B, a C, a D, or an E for each of the following. If you think you did an excellent job and there was no room to improve for this criteria, you assign yourself an A. If you did a good job, then you give yourself a B. If you think you did okay, but there was definitely a few things you could improve on, then it would be a C. D means you really need to work on it, and E means we really struggled with this part of the cooking task. What I'm expecting to see is that these grades will be a little different. Okay? It's quite fine to have some in the A, some in the B, some C, D, E, etc. They shouldn't all be the same. The first criteria you're commenting on is safety in the kitchen. So were you able to use any equipment safely? Did you remember to tuck your stool in? Did you light the oven safely and remember to turn it off? Use your stovetop and correct equipment correctly, etc. If you had any safety mishaps, any burns, anything go wrong, or if the teacher had to remind you of anything, then your grade would be lower than an A. Personal hygiene. This is about the way you applied hygiene to yourself. So washing your hands and remembering to re-wash them if you coughed, sneezed, or touched anything that might cross-contaminate. Was your hair tied back? Did you wear gloves if necessary? Did you remember your apron, etc. Collecting the ingredients. Did you remember to collect everything? If you missed something and had to come back to it later, consider that in your grade. Did you use the right equipment and measuring spoons and cups and scales to collect each ingredient? Mise en place. This is about your setup. Remembering mise en place means everything in its place. On your kitchen bench, did you get out all of your equipment and collect all your ingredients before you started cooking? Were you able to find everything you needed? And was your space neatly laid out? The next one, following the recipe. Did you refer back to your recipe and follow it step by step? If you forgot something, did you go back to your recipe to check it, or were you asking your friends or your teacher questions along the way? Following your recipe means that you followed each of the steps easily and accurately and were also able to understand the terminology or the cooking words. Presenting your food. How did your food actually come out? How did you present it? Did you need to use a plate or a bowl, or were you simply putting it in a container to take away with you? Were your food items neat and even, if that applies to what you were cooking? Were they nice and golden if you were cooking them, or were they a little under or overcooked? So the presentation of your food. What grade would you give yourself for that? Clean up at the end. Now this also means clean up along the way. Did you maintain a neat and clean workspace, or did it get a little messy along the way? At the end, were you able to clean and dry your sink and have everything neatly away in your cupboards and drawers for the teacher to check? Or were there a few things that you needed to be reminded about before leaving at the end of the lesson? The last couple here, finishing on time. Were you cleaned up and ready to leave before the bell at lunchtime or before the end of the lesson? If not, then make sure you consider that in your grade too. Teamwork. Did you communicate well with your partner? Did you share the workload? Everything from the cooking to collecting ingredients and the dishes should all be shared. Were you able to work together as a team and listen to one another as well? Assign yourself a grade for this one. When you have given yourself a grade for all of the above here, from safety in the kitchen right down to teamwork, you then need to have a look at the grades and decide overall what would you give yourself. So if you have mostly A's, then you might give yourself an A or an A minus if you had a few lower grades too. If you had mostly B with some above or below, then overall you give yourself a B. If you had mostly in the C's, then give yourself a C, etc. I suggest that now you pause the video and you go and assign yourself a grade for these sections before continuing on to the second part of the evaluation. Part 2, the written section. In this section, I have a couple of tips for success. 1, explain your answers and try and include as much detail as you can and use examples where it's relevant. Try and show your understanding by including the correct cooking terminology, so the correct cooking words for equipment or the cooking methods. This will help to show that you have a good understanding of what you're writing about. Secondly, it's fine here to write about things that went wrong. This isn't going to lower your practical grade. It's really important in an evaluation that you actually evaluate or reflect on how things went, and especially when things didn't go well, that you comment on what could perhaps be improved. So let's start here. Name, that's just your name, really easy. Who did you work with for the cooking prac that you're writing about? Who was your partner? What recipe did you cook? You just need to write the name of the recipe here. So these top 3 are really very brief. We then move into some details. What are 2 of the cooking skills or methods that you used in the recipe? What were they used for? There's an example of how much detail to include here. It says, example, in the recipe we used baking. So baking is the method or the skill. We use baking when we put the muffins in the oven to bake for 20 minutes at 160 degrees. So not only does the example say that baking was used, it says what it was used for. When the muffins were put in the oven for 20 minutes at which particular degrees. This is a good answer. Okay? It's got detail in it. Now, cooking methods or skills can be anything from your chopping or your knife skills when preparing. It could be the way you cooked a particular food, whether you baked it in the oven, whether you fried it in a saucepan or in a fry pan on the stovetop. Or maybe you used a different method like stir frying, right, in your recipe. A tip here is to go back and read the method for the recipe you're writing about, and you will likely see some keywords there that you can use to write about in this section. Moving down here, what are 2 things that you and your partner or group did well in the kitchen today or in your recent cooking practical? It probably wasn't today. Explain. Positives can be anything from the way you communicated together, your safety in the kitchen, your hygiene. So basically any of these things up here at the top that you think you did really well. So if you gave yourself an A or a B for any of these, you might choose them as things that you did well in the kitchen. What's really important with this question is that you explain your answer. If you say that we showed great teamwork in the kitchen, then in your second sentence you need to explain how did you show great teamwork. This might be that you talked with one another before starting and decided who was collecting which ingredients and was going to complete which steps of the recipe. Or maybe your strength was time management because you were able to be cleaned up on time before lunch and offered to do extra jobs at the end. So explaining what you did well and give me an example. Next question. What is one thing that you could do better next time in the kitchen? So again, it's useful to come up to the top and see which section you gave yourself the lowest mark. Whichever one is the lowest grade would be a good idea to write about. So for example, if you say you could do a better cleanup next time in the kitchen, again, explain why could you do better? we forgot to wipe down our sink, it was wet and had some crumbs in the plug hole. Or we forgot to neaten our drawers and put things away in our cupboards. Next question, what did your food look like and taste like? There's a section here for look and a section for taste. For this question, I want you to pretend that the person reading this never got to see your food and you're trying to explain it in a way that they have a very clear picture in your mind of what you made, even though they haven't seen it. They can picture it because you've explained it so well. So what did it look like? Okay, what colors could you see? What shape was the food? What plate or bowl or bag or container did you use to present or take your food home in? What size was the food? Okay, all of those things can be explained in the look. Moving on to the taste. Now, if you didn't taste your food, it's important to still put something here, but what you could do is say what you think the food would taste like because of the ingredients that were added, or comment on someone else's opinion that did taste the food. Otherwise, hopefully you did get to eat it, and you can comment on the flavors, particularly that were strong, and then other things that you could taste that were perhaps a little bit more subtle. 2 more questions to go. When would this dish be suitable to eat? What time of day or what occasion? So if you made a pizza, for example, for your practical, what time of day would that be suitable to eat? Perhaps you would suggest lunch or dinner. Or you might suggest some occasions like a birthday or a family gathering to eat the pizzas. Lastly, there's 3 ingredients that you could add or swap into the recipe you cooked. So let's say again you made pizza. If you were to create the pizza again, what could you add to it to make it more so to your liking perhaps? If the recipe at school had olives and capsicum and ham, maybe you would like to add pineapple or swap something off and instead add anchovies or extra cheese. Okay, 3 things that you could add in to the recipe to make it taste even better. I hope this has helped, and please ask if you have any further questions.